Good evening. My name is Faris Hussain, and I'm one of the Medics Academy and FDocs team members. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing our speciality webinar speaker, Dr. Matt Morgan, a critical care consultant based in Cardiff. Dr. Morgan is one of the most inspiring doctors I've ever worked with. Tonight, he'll be talking about his experience and advice as an author, with his talk titled Doctor to Author. He released his book Critical: Stories from the Brink of Life nearly 2 years ago. This book weaves together science, medicine, history, and patient stories, taking the reader on a tour around an intensive care unit. This book has been critically recognized and nominated for many awards, and is one I would thoroughly recommend. Dr. Morgan is also a regular columnist for the British Medical Journal and has written many international newspaper articles, and has spoken all over the world about writing as a doctor. I'm very excited to hear what advice he has for all of us. Over to Dr. Morgan.
Right, well, hello everybody. Thank you for asking me to do this webinar today. My name is Matt Morgan. I work as an intensive care consultant in Cardiff, but today we are not going to be talking about intensive care or fluids or ventilators. We're going to talk about something which is much more important actually, which is writing and telling stories. I became a writer a few years ago and have subsequently written a book which has been translated into a number of languages, including Russian, Portuguese, Chinese, Korean. And I'm really going to give you some of the top tips about how you too can write things that others want to read. Now, don't worry about writing and scribbling all this down. I've put all of these top tips on a website free for you to download. You can go to doctortoauthor.com, enter your email address, and it'll send that to you. And importantly, there's also a really big discount actually for the full course, especially for Medics Academy, that you can just enter using this promo code. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So why am I talking about writing? Why am I talking about stories at all? Well, I want to give you an example what a difference this can actually make. So I'm going to give you two stories and I want you to think in your heads how this may impact you, how this may impact patients. Now, the research topic I did as a PhD was all about infection and sepsis, and here's two stories from that time. Sepsis affects as many as 30 million people a year globally. Sadly, around 7 to 9 million of those people will die, about 1 every 3.5 seconds, and survivors may face lifelong consequences. So that's story number one. However, after becoming a writer, after learning about writing, after writing a book, this is now how I would want to present that as story number two. This chap on the right, his name is Chris. Chris is the reason that I did intensive care medicine. He's the reason I wrote my book. Chris was a student who wanted to travel the world, and he climbed to the top of Mount Kenya, helping 2 children from the local slum ascend for the first time. Sadly, 12 hours later, Chris developed a severe infection called sepsis. 6 weeks later, Chris died in the intensive care unit that I was working at. It was just a few days after his 18th birthday party, and I want to tell you why he died. So I hope you'll agree that although the facts in there and the subject matter actually will lead on to much the same thing, stories can really have an impact, not only as a patient, as a family member, as a relative, but as a health profession. And that's why I want to tell you how to write better stories and how to write better. And in fact, the impacts that your writing already has as a doctor are huge. This is an art installation by a Mexican artist called George Blake. It's called Bricks. And what you can see at the bottom of this wall, which is indented, is a very simple book called The Castle by a writer called Franz Kafka. He was a German who wrote this in 1920, and he was a very introverted character. But his book had a huge impact on the world, on society, and indeed on this wall. And so even if you are that similar character, even if you are thoughtful, introverted, or even if you're not, your writing can have as much, sometimes more impact than your day-to-day job as a doctor, as a nurse, as a healthcare provider. But not only on that, it can also affect your own life. It can take you amazing places. It can allow you to travel. It can perhaps supplement an income. It can get you better known. And my life has changed radically since writing a book. I've spoken at some of the biggest book festivals all around the world. I've traveled to Bali. I've spoken at a book festival in Russia, lots in the UK. I've met some fascinating people, and it's really opened different doors, as well as allowed my career to become a portfolio career. Rather than just working in intensive care, I now have a broad range of interests. And that's what I want to show you all too. My story and my journey started, like lots of good stories, after a pint of Guinness, actually. I was in a medical conference in Ireland. I'd spoken on stage all about my research. I thought the talk went well. I went out that evening and spoke to somebody in a local bar who said, "What do you do? What do you work as?" I said, "I work in intensive care." And they said, "What's that?" And it struck me at the time, this was before COVID, of course, that I'd used all of the last 10 years of my life writing dry academic papers, speaking at conferences when people know the answers most of the time better than I did. And yet I'd forgotten about the most important thing, which is the patients and the families. People didn't know what intensive care was, what our job was. And they only found out when it was too late, when one of their loved ones was there. So that night, I wrote the first chapter of the book, which is Chris's story, a young student I met who sadly died of sepsis, and the reason I chose intensive care as a career. And from there, I wrote a bit more. I found an agent who thankfully liked the writing. We put together a proposal which went to a publishing house, a major publishing house in the UK. And I eventually, 6 months later, signed a 2-book deal. And book number 1 is Critical, Stories from the Brink of Life, which is a popular science book all about intensive care medicine and patient stories. And book number 2, hence the t-shirt I'm wearing, which is a chimpanzee, is going to be called How Kissing a Frog Can Save Your Life, which is all about how understanding the physiology and animal bodies can help us treat human disease. And that's due out in the next 6 to 12 months. And I also write now for a number of journals, magazines, newspapers, as well as some media work. So that's my story, which all started in a relatively simple way. And as I say, I want to give you some of those tips and secrets, which you can download from the website, Doctor to Author. But today, we're going to look at 3 particular things, 3 particular tips that I want to give you. And there's also an opportunity here to get a pen and paper yourself and to make your first step along your journey of being an author. So there will be 1 or 2 very short, minute-long interactive exercises for you to do. So the first question is what to write. And in a way, in medicine, there's no shortage of this. If I ask you to scribble down some of the most amazing stories you've come across already in your journey, you'll probably have no problem doing that. We are privileged as healthcare providers that we enter into the lives of people on a daily basis, and that's something very unusual. What I have found, though, is the kind of writing that people often want to read are the things where it's hard to talk about. So I tend to want to write about the things which are hard to talk about. And we often forget how shocking and troubling some of the things we see in our everyday lives can be. I have a daughter who's 8, and she often asks me what I did after a day in work. And even what I consider the most mundane of tasks or the most mundane of things, or patients which are very common with common conditions, she's absolutely fascinated by. And increasingly, the public want a small door to a big place. And you can be the person who can open that door and show people that place. And so breaking that down even further, what I've now thought is often I write about things which either make you or others cry, make you or others chuckle or laugh, or make you or others clench and become concerned. And if you think about your average day in a hospital or in a GP practice or anywhere in healthcare, we often come across these three elements. So this is the first very brief interactive exercise that I want you to do. All you need is a pen and paper, or even just the computer in front of you, or even your phone, just to very briefly make some notes on. And what I'm going to do is to give you exactly 1 minute. That's all you need. And I want you to write down in that 1 minute as many situations, people you've met, things you've encountered which make you cry, which make you chuckle or laugh, or make you clench. That may be a topic to write about in the future. Okay, don't worry about expanding them. They can be single words, they can be a sentence. You've got just 1 minute starting from now. So if you're struggling, just think back to your last placement or the last place in the hospital you were at. Who's the last patient you met? Who's the last family member that you had to break bad news to? What was the last amazing scientific discovery that you read about or even did yourself in some research? What questions really get in your head at the end of every day? What are the things you don't know that you want to find out? Write all of these things down, just a word, even just a sentence. Don't worry about the spelling. Don't worry about how you justify it. Just go for it. Write it down. Last 10 seconds or so now. Cast your mind back maybe a week ago, maybe a month ago, maybe a year ago. And last 5 seconds. And stop there. Okay, have a good look at the things that you've written now. See the situations that you've thought about. How do they divide up? Are they situations which have made you cry, chuckle or clench? Are they a mixture of all three? Are they mainly ones which are sad or mainly ones which are happy? Have you got a style there? Have you got an interest already? You probably have. Perhaps you didn't know it. Okay, so now we've talked very briefly about what to write, what kind of situations that you want to write about and easily come to mind. What about the practicalities of how to write? Surely in order to get a book published like this, you must be a great author, you must be amazing at grammar, you must have maybe done some qualifications in writing, and like lots in life, I've learned that's not the case. My passion growing up, this was me and my dad, was always science. In fact, my primary school teacher shouted at me for spelling my name wrong in school, my own very name. Even later on through A-levels, my writing was very poor quality. My spelling was even worse. I remember I spelled gas with 2 S's on one, I think, A-level paper even. But I always loved stories. And so even though I didn't perhaps have the skills to write them, I always wanted to think about them. And I was always reading. I was always reading other people's stories and had a passion for telling stories. And like everything in life, until you start doing this, you won't get better. And so whether it's a daily journal, whether it's a short blog, whether it's anything, then that will help. And remember, as a doctor, as a healthcare professional, you were already a writer. Everything you do in work probably involves writing, whether it's discharge letters, whether it's outpatient letters, whether it's patient notes, whether it's responding to complaints or doing research. You are already a writer. And often you have to explain complex concepts to patients, to families, to other colleagues. You need to inspire students, you need to teach them, and you need to contextualize complex situations in simple ways. And that's really what telling a story as an author is all about. And you are already that to some extent. But perhaps what you need is a system to put all that good work into practice and get an output, get something made from it. Now, there's no one right system, but I'm going to tell you the one I use. And the system always needs to be, as far as I'm concerned, always available, always there, always close at hand, and allows you to write wherever you are, day or night. Now, this could be something as simple as a small black book. I keep a small pad of paper next to my bed, so if I think of something early in the morning or late at night, I can jot it down. But I tend to use an electronic system for this. And the particular bit of software which I use, which I'm not paid to say at all, I just love it, is called Ulysses, which is a writing piece of software, but it keeps your writing synchronized completely over multiple devices, backed up, safe, and it's a very nice, clean user interface. And what this means is if I'm having an idea when I'm walking through the park, walking the dog, maybe after a busy day at work, I can quickly get my phone out or my laptop out. I can really quickly jot down some ideas. So quickly, in fact, looking at this screenshot, it's riddled with errors, spelling errors, the grammar's all over the place, but that's fine. All I'm using this for at the minute is a place to put ideas. And that's synchronized across my devices and I can come back to it. It's always there. And most importantly, what's more frustrating than ever is having an amazing idea that you then forget. And really, if you have an amazing idea you forget, there was no point in having that amazing idea in the first place. And again, this is put down in a very rough way. In fact, Terry Pratchett said that the first draft of anything is just really telling yourself the story. Now, this software is also very powerful. In fact, I've written my whole book in this software. You can see from the tabs on the side there, there's other books that I'm considering or putting together. There's articles that I'm writing. There's an article for a newspaper that I was in the middle of writing when I took this screenshot, for example. So it's a really powerful bit of software, but it can be as simple as a notepad in your pocket or at the side of your bed. Okay, another top tip for you is the power of the senses. And again, this isn't something which should surprise you, but getting into a writing mood can be quite important. If you're in that flow state, you can get out a huge number of words in a short period of time. And so how do I do that? I do it in three ways, really. Number one, I like writing in a certain place. And it doesn't matter where that place is, but there's a room in my house that I tend to go, and that's the place that I write. And that means there's everything I need in there, and it gets me mentally in the position to do that. I also think the senses are very powerful. And so I actually have a candle in the room or some incense sticks, not because I particularly like them, but just because the sense of that smell means that I'm about to start writing. And it almost shortcuts your mind into that mode, even if you don't feel like it. And finally, I found that listening to music on a loop is really helpful for getting into that flow state. Now, my entire first book was pretty much written with this album, Moshiba's Big Calm, on loop, which for me was great because although it contains some lyrics and some singing and speaking, it's not too much. And yet the songs are all very different. It's at a length which is good for my particular writing focus. And that would just be played continuously on loop every time that I write. So have a think about and a little experiment with that. One other top hack that I found is when you're in your place of writing, whether that's a coffee shop or a room in your house, don't plug in your laptop if it is you're using a laptop. And that really focuses the mind and forces you into a particular time frame. My laptop has a power of about 4 hours maximum, obviously less if it's not fully charged. And knowing that that's going to run out in an hour or 2 hours really focuses my mind, especially if I'm out in a coffee shop, for example. It'll get my ideas down, it'll get my writing started, and then I can plug it in for doing some of the more complex editing perhaps later down the line. But give that a go, see if it focuses your mind and forces you to do things. Now, I've spoken a few times about structure, and for me, having a structure allows my creativity to get better, not worse. Some people worry that sticking to a certain structure will mean that articles or writing is mechanical or repetitive. But for me, it really then allows me to experiment with language and with other things. And for some of the short articles for newspapers or blogs that I've been writing, especially over the last year with COVID, I have used the 3-2-1 system. And that consists of 3 bullet points, in other words, 3 things that I want the story to contain, 3 facts, if you like, or 3 parts to that journey. I like putting in there physical devices. And what I mean by that is actual things in the real world, whether it's patients, medical equipment, or situations that others can actually feel familiar with. And then I often like either posing or answering one particular question. Okay, so it's the 3-2-1 system, 3 bullet points, 2 physical devices, 1 question posed or answered. And to give you an example of that, this is probably one of the most read articles that I wrote for the British Medical Journal, and it's about the way that hospital wards were initially made many hundreds of years ago, but really they are perhaps not fit for purpose anymore for modern healthcare, especially technology and the way that teams work. So I wanted to apply this system of 3 bullet points, 2 physical devices, 1 question to this. And in fact, the way the article came about at all was that I was waiting to go into a ward to see a patient who was ill, and coming through the doors the other way was a porter pushing a bed with a patient who had sadly died. Now they had their dignity. They were coming through the door to go to the mortuary, sadly. But it just struck me that this was the same entrance that was being used for patients, for families, for healthcare professionals working there. And that really struck a chord with me. So I wrote that down using my system one night and then wrote this article a few days later. That's one of the physical devices that I used. And really the 3 bullet points I wanted to get across was, number 1, where did hospital wards first come from? Where were they invented? Number 2, the fact that they're not fit for purpose anymore for reasons which we'll explain. And then number 3, what are some of the solutions to that? And the 2 physical devices that I wanted to use were, firstly, of course, the bed that porter was pushing. And secondly, the fact that it's often complex to find places. You have to rely on signage, which says things like Block A, Tower 3, Ward 7F, 6G. So the first line that reads, as I reach the top of the staircase, a faded sign reads, Block A, Tower 3, Ward 7F, and 6G. No one really knows what these characters mean or how they help us navigate the twists of an ever-changing, expanding hospital. And I'm sure all of you have seen kind of faded signs like that. So those are my 2 physical devices. And then the question posed and perhaps partially answered is, what do we need to do to our wards to make them fit for purpose? Something as simple perhaps as having different entrances for patients and families and healthcare staff. Perhaps something as simple as it being a circular structure rather than an in-out structure, which it is in modern hospitals. So again, that's really just an example how using this system can help you formulate sometimes complex topics to be answered. Okay, so that's the 3-2-1 system. And what I want you to do now, which is another very short 1 minute long interactive exercise, is looking back at those topics that you've written already, which made you cry or clench or chuckle. Choose one of those, perhaps your favorite. And now I want you to very quickly sketch out from that 3 points you'd like to get across, 2 physical devices that you could maybe use in an article about that, and 1 question that you want to pose or you want to answer at the end. Okay. Again, you've got just 1 minute to do this. This is meant to be quick. It's meant to be rough and ready. 1 minute going from now. Perhaps choose the topic which you wrote down first, perhaps the one that just feels like the best and the easiest to do. And again, don't worry, this doesn't have to be precise. And in terms of physical devices, again, remember, it doesn't have to be an actual item, just like that sign on the wall. It's often something that you can see, something you can feel, something you can hear, trying to place the reader in that very place that you are. Okay, so that's over halfway now. Just another 20 seconds or so to write down some of your thoughts. 3 bullet points, 2 physical devices, 1 question posed, or 1 question answered. Last few seconds. 3, 2, 1, and stop. Perfect. Wonderful. Okay, so we've looked at what could we write about. We've looked at some hacks, some top tips, some secrets about how to write, how to get into that flow state in a place that you're used to, with some music, using a system and a structure. Probably the most common question I get asked is, how do you find the time to write? I'm a full-time NHS clinician. I also run research in intensive care. I've got a family, 2 children, a dog. You know, life is busy, but life is good. But for me, writing is a really special time that I have to myself to think and to reflect and to write. But how do you find that? Well, the first thing to say is have a little look at where your time in your life goes currently. And it's no surprise to say that if you look at your phone or your device and track some of your usage of things like social media apps and the internet, it's sometimes a rude awakening. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It may be a very good thing, but you do have to make choices in life. And if writing is something that you'd like to do, if you'd like to have your article in a newspaper, in a magazine, in a hospital journal, or even a physical book on the shelf in your local bookshop, then you do have to make choices. And perhaps reducing the use of some of these will allow that. Now, that may seem a small change, but having just a look at a friend of mine Twitter account, somebody who wanted to write but didn't have the time, having a look over the last 500 days of their use, there were 600 tweets, on average 25 words per tweet. That's about 15,000 words. That's about a quarter of a book. Okay, so in less than 2 years, they could have written a quarter of a book without actually dedicating extra time to write in, just either adapting or reducing the use of some social media, for example. In fact, if you write 100 words a day, then you'll write a book in 2 years, depending on the length of your book. So there is time there, and you can be efficient about things. You know, some of the work you have to do through training in medicine is writing anyway, and some of that may be able to be adapted. Some of the best tweets and social media outputs you can have could be part of a longer form divided up for social media. So you don't have to remove that part of your life at all. In fact, this may expand it. And another place to look really is your diary. Now, this is a screenshot from one of my months in 2019, some years ago. And this was a month where I was doing a huge amount of writing, but it was a really crazy, busy month. Okay, but in this month, something very important happened. The next series of Game of Thrones was released, and I managed to find 8 hours of my time in this crazy busy month with night shifts and going away and various other things to watch 8 hours of Game of Thrones. What if you'd used that for 8 hours of writing? Okay, so time is often there. It may not feel like it is, but if you have a system in place where you can do this efficiently, where you can do it anywhere, where you can sync across devices, whether it's a notepad or software, when you dedicate thought and time to it, time is there. You can do this, you can write. My most popular letter, which I wrote in the middle of COVID, called A Letter from ICU, which was viewed by 3 million people on Channel 4, read by nearly 500,000 people. It was just 300 words long. So you don't have to dedicate massive amounts of time to have an impact on the world. Just think about that. Okay, so we've had a look at what to write. We've had a look at how to write. We've had a little look at how can you find the time to do impactful writing. I've told you, you are already an amazing writer as a healthcare professional, as a doctor. It's already a big part of your job, and you could make that even better, more impactful with just a few small changes. So what next? Well, maybe nothing next. Maybe you're happy just thinking about those things, or maybe you can set yourself a goal. Maybe you can set yourself a goal to write an article that you're going to publish on a blog, in a magazine, in a medical journal, in a newspaper, in a magazine, in a bookshop over the next 3, 6, 12 months. You can do that. You have the time to do that. You have the skills to do that. And I want to help you along your way. And if that is something you want to do, if you do want to have something different in your career, whether it's travel, whether it's speaking engagements, whether it's just doing something different to meet interesting people, then there's a way we can help. All of the resources we talked about today, you can download for free on this website, doctor2author.com. And then a week later, I'll send you a really special invite to an 8 to 10 week long modular course, which contains video content. Even the templates I use to get my first book deal are in there, as well as modules on things like patient confidentiality and reflective writing, which you need to do anyway. And for people who've watched this video, there's this great, massive £100 discount. And importantly, you can use things like your study leave budget to get this course. So it may not actually cost you any money at all. It also includes 2 webinars with me, so we can chat one-to-one, talk about how your writing's going, and allows you to connect to other people in the medical writing community. So thank you for listening. Remember, you're already a powerful writer, and just like the way this book has impacted on these bricks, writing can impact on patients, on families, and on you, your life and your career. Thanks very much. Hope to see you on the course soon.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. That was inspiring and insightful, and a great look into what you can do as a writer and as a doctor. A reminder to check out the website doctor2author.com. And if you wish to access the full online writing course available on this website, to use the special £100 discount using the code FDOCS2021 in all capital letters. Make sure you check out our Medics Academy website and our Facebook group to look for all our future talks relevant to the FDOCS program, as well as the other programs run by Medics Academy. I look forward to seeing you all next time and hope you have a lovely rest of the evening.